We are live. This is Asia Matters. We are in the Asia Tech Podcast studio in Singapore. Let's talk about who's at the table tonight to talk about why Asia Matters this week. Let's do a quick round robin, starting with yourself. Kineret, how are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm Kineret. I'm from Impact Tech.
That's enough. That's fine.
Okay.
We can get deeper in a minute.
Okay.
Kineret, you probably have seen. I mean, if you're in the startup scene in Singapore, you'll know Kineret.
Yeah, people know me because of my hair.
Your
That's how
hair.
they
It's a
recognize
brand.
me. Yes, it is a brand. Yeah.
It's a conscious brand
Yeah.
and almost in sync with our studio tonight.
Yes.
For those that are just listening on the audio, by the way, we have to describe this. It's the red. Neville, yourself, sir.
I'm Neville McKenzie, lecturer in creative industries entrepreneurship.
Excellent. Thanks for joining. Have you done a round Asia Matters table with us before?
No, this is the first
first one.
The first one, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Anything can happen.
Yeah. Substitute.
So
Called in.
there you go. Clemen, welcome. We've done a podcast together, but this is our first live one. How does it feel?
Graham, thanks for having me here. And my name is Clemen Chiang, CEO of Spiking.
Excellent. And you're a man of many talents as well. You seem to be running many businesses at once. It's another story, isn't it? You keep yourself very busy. You've had a very successful few weeks. Raised some funds. Got some news to share tonight.
Yeah, I think it must be a blessing since I did the last show with you.
Yeah, I'll take part of the credit if that's okay. Fine. All right, good. Well, this is the format for today. We're going to share stories from the world of the Asian tech ecosystem and what's going on and what's interesting, and from our own journeys as well. And I'm really just facilitating tonight, so I'm not the interviewer in any way. So it's open for all of you who'd like to ask questions to anybody about, what do they think of a certain story? And if they want to go deeper, then it's completely up to you if you want to ask questions. If you're watching at home, you can ask questions live in the YouTube chat feed, make comments, keep it clean, keep it positive. And if you want to comment and you're watching this on the archive, we'll pick up everything that you say in the comments. And also, if you are watching this or linking through from LinkedIn, feel free to comment as well in the comment section. So let's kick off. We're talking about Asia, and we're talking about why Asia matters tonight. I want to start off by turning to Japan. Kineret, what's going on? Let's talk about Japan first. So maybe we can look at this story first and then talk about your own experience in Japan recently and what you're doing there. So there is a story here which is based on information coming out of the city of Fukuoka. Now, Fukuoka is on the west coast of Japan, and it's it's not really known as a hub of innovation, but Fukuoka, like some of the Japanese cities, is trying to reinvent itself and attract talent and compete a bit with Tokyo as well. It's sort of a second-tier city, so it's done a lot in terms of trying to reinvent itself as this hub for foreign entrepreneurs to come there. It's a lot easier now to get a startup visa in Fukuoka, whereas it's not as easy in the rest of Japan to get a startup visa. And it's trying to set up these sort of government-driven co-working spaces, or trying to build a whole ecosystem around the local government. We'll have a look at that story in a minute. Your first sort of impressions, takeaways from your projects in Japan, Kineret. What can you share with us, and what do we need to know about what's going on in Japan right now in the startup scene there?
I think it's very exciting what's going on in the startup scene in Japan. It's sort of, I think, like Singapore was about 10 years ago in terms of the startup scene. There are startups, but until recently, usually if you're doing something good, you have this good innovation. After, I would say, a few months, the big corporates sort of swallow you. So there wasn't a lot of room for startups in Japan, but it's changing now. Also, the big corporates understand that they need to let go, and they have their own internal issues. So the startup scene is really growing there, and we're now, due to that, we're also starting our own projects now in Japan, our own program in Japan. There are many also co-working spaces opening up now in Japan, a lot. And you really feel this, I would say, startup ecosystem energy in the streets of Tokyo.
How is it in terms of like finding talent in people there? Because this is always an issue. I mean, I lived in Japan in the early 90s and came back many years later, and it was always a country where they played it safe. You know, why work in a startup when you can work in Mitsubishi or, you know, one of the big companies, the big brands? How is it now? Are people changing?
Yeah, people changing because they know that if they work for Mitsubishi or all of these big corporates, their future will stay in Mitsubishi as maybe they will have I would say 1 or 2 more positions, but because it's an aging population in Japan, so they will not reach the top, and they find it boring. They also want to work for these big MNCs, these global cool MNCs like Facebook, Google, Amazon that are now really dominating Japan. So why work for these big corporates? And like I said, the big corporates have their own issues to deal with.
Yeah.
So but it is still hard to find good talent and good talent that speaks English.
Yeah. It's a subset of a subset, right?
It's
Which is
not easy.
yeah. I wonder as well. I mean, we talked about Singapore. It's like, you know, the success story of Singapore as a startup ecosystem. Whether Japan could look to that and that would work in as many, you know, in the same similar kind of ways it worked in Singapore here. A very top-down approach. You know, they've been doing this for many years now. Japan keeps, is catching up. What do people think about that in terms of what's worked here in Singapore? You know, your thoughts. I mean, you've seen the startup ecosystem here develop over the last 10 years. What can you say? Because a lot of people from the outside, especially if they come from Silicon Valley, the idea of a top-down built startup ecosystem is almost an anathema to what works in California, where it's very much grassroots, isn't it? You know, is there a case for example, these top-down ecosystems, you know, like in Japan and like in Singapore, we can say, actually, this works where government has to play quite an active role? What do you think, Clemen?
I got 2 points to share on that. First of all, for our company, Spiking, we have a Japanese investor. And it's interesting to note that at a point in time when they invested into Spiking, that was in our seed round, they have just raised their first round of funding. And within like a short span of less than 3 years, they just recently listed on Tokyo Stock Exchange this year. And it was mind-blowing to me. And one of the underwriters for them is Nomura. If you get Nomura as an underwriter, you like achieve the gold plate,
Yeah.
the gold stamp, right? So I was looking at them and I was chatting with the shareholder. Wow, you guys are super on track. It's like you just dash and chase the numbers, and you cross the line, and right now you are publicly listed, while we are still on our second funding round, right? So I'm not too sure about the government funding support in Japan, but I can share about what's happening in Singapore. For Spiking, we are probably the last beneficiary of the National Research Foundation funding support. They ceased that in 2016. And ever since then, the startup scene has been pretty quiet in that sense. I think most of the VC money has gone into much bigger startups at the A or B round, like Carousel, Shopback, Grab. So you have many startups right now struggling to raise money. So whether is it top-down or bottoms up from a grassroots approach, at the end of the day, startups need all the help that they can get from the entire ecosystem.
Yeah. How did you find when you went to Japan, the sort of support that you got there? Was it very much sort of driven by big companies, or did you find a wealth of these sort of like grassroots hustlers like you would expect to find in Silicon Valley? What's it like for somebody who has never been to Japan, the startup scene there?
Well, first of all, I just want to add regarding Singapore, because I've been in the Singapore growing ecosystem, that I think the government here did an excellent job in creating this startup ecosystem. So yeah, at the beginning, they just gave money to everybody very easily. And then they said, okay, now we have enough. Now let's minimize it. So yeah, 2 years ago, they changed all the schemes. Now it's much harder to get these grants, but they created this, I would say this tier. Okay, now only the better ones get, and the better ones. But they have a lot of grants for the young startups, like the SG founder and all these. They revamped everything. So they're still doing a very good job. In Japan, the support is mainly for us, at least from for big companies. But we are in contact with a few government agencies. But you first need to prove yourself in order to go to the government and say, hey, give me something, especially for foreigners coming to Japan. They don't know me. They don't know what I'm doing. I'm just sort of a piece of paper for them. So you really need to prove yourself. But I'm sure we will. And yeah, we hope to get some government support from Japan.
Good.
And I want to add to that point. It's interesting. Last year, we got, I think, a Japanese consultancy company approached us and say, come and set up your base in Tokyo. We give you all the startup support from the Japanese government. 1 year later, nothing heard up from them. This year, they contacted me again. And I asked them, hey, did you remember you contacted us last year? From the very same company. I say, what's going on? I can just trace you on my email, and all the conversations are just shown in front of my desktop. And did you forget about the conversation we had last year? He said, oh, very sorry. We'll look into your case this year. And again, the conversation just disappeared again.
Yeah.
I think we have to exercise extreme patience in navigating in this very new market for us.
Were they sort of coming from a government agency, or were they consulting to them? I mean, without sort of naming names, obviously, were they connected
I
to an
think they are
agency?
kind of a government-endorsed
Broker.
private company or consultancy company, one of the big names. But unfortunately, things happen like this. I thought it's quite interesting to share about this point.
Yeah, it's a different market, but I think you need to act the same way you act and maybe help change the market. Or it's very hard to change their own culture, but
Yeah.
we have our ways. So
Yeah, exactly. Don't give up. Be persistent, and you're making
exactly
progress as well. And I think
persistence.
it's a good thing as well as you blaze a trail for other people who want to get into these markets.
We try to get into the Japanese market like really for the last 2 years, being very
Right.
persistent and never giving up, and finding the right people, changing the people, understanding the market better, but really being persistent, and it pays off.
Yeah, good for you. I mean, I've lived in Japan many years. I'm married to a Japanese citizen. So, I know the ups and downs, especially on the communication side. One of the challenges is I think we experienced this as well when you contacted me about Japan, is that you can put people in touch with somebody in Japan, but it seems that the Japanese, especially, to outsiders, are very, difficult in terms of following up on communication. Like you can contact them and then you hear nothing. Whereas, maybe here in Singapore, people are a bit more proactive, right? It just seems to be a cultural thing. Like they're used to working for big companies where you don't respond through sort of outside channels. Everything has its proper place. So there you go. Some cultural insight. Let's move from Japan now and take a trip to China. Neville?
Yeah, well...
So why are we going to China? So, well, not quite China. We're going to China and Jamaica. So there's an interesting bridge there.
Yeah, it's just China's outward investment. Everyone knows of the Silk Road. But what's not so well known is their investment into the West Indies and South America. And an example would be when Chinese companies do go invest into countries abroad, they tend to bring more of their Chinese workers with them. They do it in a very different way. They do it in a very Chinese way. And that's based on their sort of historical way that they've developed over the last 50 odd years, where they've had a large workforce that's able to be paid very low wages in comparison to Western countries. And then they bring this philosophy with them abroad. And in the West Indies, it tends to set up some conflicts, which people don't fully understand and it's more of a cultural thing. Western countries look at China and they think, that's not the way we did it. But then there are issues with that. So it's a number of people have been talking about it in the West Indies, in Europe.
Well, there's this newspaper article here, and it says, it highlights the difference. It says that Western expats bring their families, whereas the Chinese, when they go to West Indies, or also Africa is a big investment for them as well, they come on their own. And it's usually just the men and it's the workers, right? So you can imagine how that can create some kind of friction, isn't it? But I think as well, it tends to get viewed negatively, doesn't it, by the media? You know, with Frank Lavin, who was on the show on Friday, he was saying, you know, like where, for example, China would invest in in a country, it's seen as sort of, you know, a global play for domination. Whereas if the West, quote unquote, invests in a country, it's seen as aid. Right?
Yeah.
So, you know, the media will always play it that way, right? So tell us, what are they doing in Jamaica?
Well, it varies from opening local shops to buying up land, and it's and you know, to build factories, industries that weren't there before. But in order to, they don't have the skills are not there, so they bring the skilled workers in, and they don't necessarily pass on all the training and the expertise to the local community, and that has set up some friction. But it has raised standards in other ways. You know, like people are able to access new products which they weren't able to get to. Yeah.
You lived in China for how many years?
15.
15 years. So
Yeah.
when you think about the people that get sent out, I guess they're being sent by companies rather than they're volunteering to go, right?
It's a bit of both.
Is it?
Yeah.
What kind of people would say, right, let's go to Jamaica? Because I can't imagine there's any historical connection
People
between...
that like the beach.
Right, okay, there you go.
Well, actually, there is a historical, because the Chinese have been emigrating to Jamaica since the sort of the late 1800s,
Right.
early 1900s. So there's a significant Chinese population that has been there over 100 years.
Really?
And that's surprising for many people. They tend to be like is it Hakka, sort of from the South China. But they've been there, and many of them have even emigrated from Jamaica to Canada and the USA and other parts of it. So there's a significant Jamaican Chinese population in other countries.
North America.
Yeah, and they speak with Jamaican accents.
What, with the Chinese face? But
Yeah,
that
yeah.
would be pretty interesting
Yeah.
to see.
And when I visited Jamaica, I actually stayed with a Chinese Jamaican family. And I know, you know, in England, I knew Jamaicans that were of Chinese descent. So it's something that many people find strange when they hear a Chinese person speaking with a Jamaican accent. They ask, where are you from? And they say, I'm from Jamaica.
Yeah.
I'd be taken aback.
Yeah.
How about the marriages? Are they intermarriages in Jamaica between the Chinese and the locals?
Yeah. Well, the you know, the previous or the older, you know, emigres. There are intermarriages, but they also, I mean, there's a Chinese population in Mexico as well, that's been there for a long time. So it's, and that, you know, and they do, you know, Chinese communities tend to be very, very strong and hold together. So they keep their language to a certain extent, and some of their, you know, their religious beliefs. So, you know, it's there. So now this new wave of Chinese coming in, they would be viewed maybe differently, because they're now bringing in investment. You know, they don't necessarily, their English may not be as good, or their Jamaican English may not be as good, but they're seeing Chinese people there, and they're thinking, how did you get here?
Right. And it's I mean, that sort of wave coming in now of those Chinese coming to Jamaica as an example, that's sort of a different generation from the ones that you mentioned, those that have settled for many generations, right? And I guess they're probably like cheaper, you know, manual labor as well. And they're coming on their own. Yeah. They're probably not as educated as some of the other people back home. So, you know, there's all that sort of going on as well. And I know it's just from the article that you shared that they were saying about these Chinese immigrants coming, and they're saying that they don't take any time off.
No.
Right. You know, no holidays, no break, no family members.
Yeah.
It must be a tough life, though. I mean, okay, you get the beach in Jamaica, but no time to enjoy it.
Yeah. But they're there to work. You know, they're there to earn money to send back to China for their families. They're not there necessarily to settle in Jamaica. They're there to work and do better for their own families. And, you know, it depends on, you know, whether they're management level or they're sort of manual workers. and you'll find that they're not expecting to remain. And that's the goal. It's they're going out to do a job and then return home, not go out and
they're not emigrating as a
No.
full-time thing, right?
It's
Okay.
like the domestic workers in Singapore, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the
They come to work,
Filipinos. Yeah,
And the construction workers.
right. Exactly. I mean, if you look at China, for example, that whole sort of emigrating from rural townships to Shanghai or Beijing, for example. I mean, is that still a thing? I mean, my images of China from years ago was like, these families that would leave their kids with grandparents, right? And then they would go to the big cities and work in factories, and these kids would sort of grow up on their own with their grandparents, right? I mean, is that still a thing in China?
Yeah.
It's still happening. People doing that.
Yeah.
So this is just another choice for them, right?
Yeah. Chinese rural workers, one of their goals is to work in the big city, especially for the younger generation, and they do. When they go to university and they get their degrees, they understand that the job that their degree is in isn't necessarily going to be found in the village where they're coming from. So they are looking to get a job in a big city. So that is a goal. And you find that it's not necessarily, doesn't have to be Beijing or Shanghai. There are lots of other cities that are developing rapidly, and that you've got, tier 1, tier 2 cities. Everyone knows a tier 1, Beijing, Shanghai. But there are tier 2 and tier 3 cities that are not well known.
Right, but there's still like 10 million people, right?
Yeah, and they're growing rapidly, and they have a lot of money in them, and a lot of jobs are being created there. Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. And this is definitely a shift to watch. And then, I think increasingly now, I mean, if you look at what's happening in the news, for example, with US and China in terms of like the trade sanctions, China is increasingly aware of investing in other markets, like going into Brazil and buying up soybean farms, rather than being heavily dependent on the US. So I think they're going to be beneficiaries of what's going on at that top level. The Vietnams and the Bangladeshis and the Brazils, for example, will all benefit from this, and Jamaica as well.
And for a long time, a lot longer than people realize, that Chinese companies, because their skilled workers are being paid more, they have been exporting jobs to countries like Vietnam and Cambodia, the manufacturing jobs. When I was there, this was a phenomena that had been going on for a few years. So it's Chinese companies themselves. They still have to make a profit, and they're still so they still have to look, where can we get it done cheaper, and that's also happening in China.
Yeah. That's natural, right?
And today's latest news is China and Russia just signed off a $100 billion trade deal together.
Wow.
I wonder what they're going to trade.
Yeah. It's not going to be soybeans.
Yeah.
There you go. I mean, it's just fascinating, isn't it? I mean, this is just like an ongoing shift that I think when we look back on it, it's just lots and lots of different events happening. And it's hard to sort of say that was the moment when everything changed. But, in 20, 30 years' time, they'll look back on this sort of era and say that was when the balance tipped, in terms of like geopolitics and so on. All right, good. We've done China. I'm sure China's going to be back at some point. It's never far away, is it, from our discussions? Clemen, let's talk about Bitcoin, because you're the most qualified on the table to help us understand what is going on in the world of Bitcoin. So we can bring this article up first.
And what's it worth today? How much is the
Yeah.
Bitcoin today?
So right now it's 6,000 plus.
Wow, it really went down.
6,000 what? 6,000 Sing dollars?
6,000
US.
plus US dollars.
Right.
And it's very volatile. If you take a look at last Wednesday to Thursday, within a short span of 24 hours, Bitcoin actually dropped $1,000 from 7,003 to 6,003 in about 24 hours. And there are major triggers of that. And that prompted me to put together a piece of article, a blog post. The question I wanted to ask is, will it spike? And what I found out is, since 2010 until today, that's about 8 years ago, Bitcoin has spiked about 7 times. Of the 7 times, 3 of it were crashes. And of the 3 crashes, each of them crashed more than 90% from its previous high. Right now, effectively, we are on the third crash. We are about 68% down from the high of January. So if you take the high of January as 19,000, you multiply that against 0.10 or 0.10 at 10%, it will crash all the way to $1,900.
Right. So we've got a long way to go.
Long way to go. It may happen very fast or it may not happen at all. So right now, this is the big question. And for each crash, people are asking, oh, that's probably the demise of Bitcoin. That's the end of cryptocurrency and everybody can pack their bags and go home, right? But it survived. It has survived every crash. And in fact, what we are looking at right now, 8 years on, there are more and more companies, governments deploying blockchain as a technology. So in the marketplace today, there's major confusion. They are not able to handle the fact that there's one part called utility and the other part called pricing. They're confusing these two concepts. So let me take some time to explain this. Utility means the usage of the technology. Now, Bitcoin or blockchain as a technology is sound. Banks are deploying it, governments are deploying it, companies are deploying it. But on the other hand, you're looking at the pricing of these coins, from Bitcoin to Ethereum to Ripple to the thousands of other altcoins out there. But they are so volatile. It's going up and down, crashing like nobody's business. So when they mix these two concepts together, they say, oh, perhaps the technology is not ready, and that's why the price is fluctuating at such a high volatility. So, but if we separate the two of them, take it apart, look on the tech side. China is investing big time today. They are all out pushing for blockchain as a technology. Singapore is doing the same. US is doing likewise. In fact, just as we speak, Gemini has just launched its very own, first in the world, regulated Gemini against the US dollar. They call it the Gemini dollars. And that...
Gemini being, for those that don't know.
And that is the future, where your cryptocurrency is pegged against a standard currency in the marketplace. That gives a lot of confidence to old money. So in my blog post, I sum it up by, how do we see the future? Is to really think about old money. How do they view this? Whether is cryptocurrency an asset class? Is this something that they will start to move gradually from their portfolio of stocks, bonds, forex, and start allocating a portion of it into cryptocurrencies? When that shift starts to take place, then gradually cryptocurrency will be acceptable as an asset class. And that is the future we're looking at.
You've mentioned it, like you talked about utility and pricing. Can the utility part survive without the success of the currency, the coins itself? So, for example, there's a lot of people who are deep into blockchain but aren't into Bitcoin, for example, because they understand the utility value of the technology. However, does the currency itself have to be of value for the utility to work?
That's a great question, and the key word is decoupling. Is it possible to achieve decoupling effect between utility versus pricing? It's very hard,
right?
Because of its history. It started off as a tech, and people are trading on it, and many companies and projects start to take off with ICOs with the promise that the token itself will be listed on an exchange for you to trade. So right now, it kind of start to go hand in hand together. So if someone is to come in and say, let's separate them together,
right,
then where are all the money going to come from to fund all these great projects? And that is a huge question mark.
Okay. All right, we'll dive into this in a minute. Just out of interest, where does everybody stand here on blockchain and Bitcoin? Are you deep in the market, in the hash, or are you out? Where are you, Kineret?
I less believe in all these ICOs. And at the beginning, I was like, wow, this is crazy. I want to do an ICO. You just get free money. But once you really invest and understand and you say, okay, I want my startup to go ICO, you understand that you hear all these good and success stories, but you don't hear all the stories about people that lost a lot of money and invested so much and nothing really happened. You really need to understand what you're doing in order to do it. I less believe in that. I believe in, getting money the real way.
Yeah.
Real money.
You're suspicious,
Traditional, I would say.
agnostic.
Traditional in that way. Yeah,
Right.
I'm suspicious. Also, it's very like virtual. It's hard to understand, and I heard many people that eventually to get the money is not so easy.
Right, yeah, to actually cash out the
To actually
tokens.
cash out. Yeah,
right,
they close so many different exchanges and places, and it's not easy to. So I believe if you really just work hard and
Where is the liquidity of cryptocurrencies in the sense that, if I was to have a cryptocurrency with a lot of money in my wallet, how could I actually then convert that into real hard cash or, rent a bike with it or pay for my grocery with it? How close are we and what sort of countries lead in that?
So this depends a lot on network externalities and how large is your ecosystem. And to Kineret's point of view, there are real money out there in crypto space. It's just that between 2017 versus 2018, the world seems to be, we are living in two separate worlds. Last year was easy money, as what you say. Anyone launches a white paper, they can raise easy money from the public. This year is really tough. In fact, the supporters are very, very detailed right now before they put in the first dime into your project. So I will say it goes back to the core. Do you have a real project that can seriously generate real money so that people can give you real money to support your project? That's a key point right now. Now, in terms of usage and how widespread it's going to be, right now there are already many projects out there that allows you to convert from crypto to crypto or crypto to fiat, fiat back to crypto, crypto back to fiat. Many avenues. Take, for example, I like to use Gemini as an example because of the fact that the twins are running it. First of all, I set up Gemini was my second crypto exchange account that I set up. It's very easy. You basically have a banking account in Singapore. You wire transfer to US Gemini. And from there, you see your money listed as US dollars. And you can straight away do a conversion to buy into Bitcoin or Ethereum. Those are the base currencies. And once you own Bitcoin or Ethereum, if you go to South Korea today, and I was just there about 2 months ago, you go into any normal standard-looking ATM machine, they have the option for you to withdraw or deposit Bitcoin or Ethereum. It's
In a
already
standard high street.
to deposit. And what about
Draw out.
draw out, same.
Yeah.
It's similar. So right now we are also in the process of building out a wallet system whereby you put in your ethers and you can take out in fiat. Those are already emerging technologies. It's already available.
Yeah.
Then the challenge is how widespread it's going to be. And back to your question, Graham, as more people come into this space, then of course the adoption of technology will be very fast. It will always follow a standard S-curve, as in any technology out there. The early movers, those who are excited believers, they'll come in really fast. Then it'll take a long time of adoption and finally hit a plateau and the laggards will finally come in.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating what's happening in Asia in particular in terms of that adoption. I think we're a little bit ahead of the curve in some countries as well. South Korea is a great example. Japan's really interesting as well because it's a real mixed market in terms of Bitcoin that obviously it has the history there as well. But it also has a very sort of like slow-moving financial banking system, right? Which is a great thing for, if you want to decentralize that and challenge it. I went to Fukuoka, I think last year, and just walking down the street, there was a bicycle rental store in Japan. Now, this must be about a year and a half ago when we were just kind of getting up to the height of Bitcoin. And what happened was the guy who owned the bike rental store could actually, exchange services for Bitcoin. So, for example, if you went in to rent a bike, you could pay with Bitcoin, which was quite rare at the time. And so, obviously, he had kind of cornered a market of people who had Bitcoin and wanted to spend it and didn't have many things to spend it on in the real world, so to speak. But what was kind of telling is that when I went to the store over a year ago, it was open, but the owner wasn't there. somebody else was running it, and they said, "Oh, where's the owner?" And he said, "Oh, he's off somewhere. He's off traveling." So what had
Became
happened?
rich.
Exactly, he cashed in all this Bitcoin
Renting
and
bikes.
made more money out of the Bitcoin than maybe the renting the bike. So there's probably a few of those stories out there.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So it was just interesting that Japan was quite advanced in that respect.
And taking heat from Japan, Japan is probably the first country in the world to regulate crypto exchanges.
Right.
And a few months back, I was in Asian Blockchain Summit in Taipei. And over there, I met a politician. He called himself the crypto congressman.
Wow.
He's driving the agenda for cryptocurrency to be developed, and
He's
Taipei
Japanese or in Taiwan?
In Taiwan.
Right. Okay.
Right? And in November, I'll be going to Malta.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister is personally inviting participants to fly into Malta because he wants to make this the blockchain island. So you're going to see more and more governments taking the initiative to drive the blockchain agenda. Not so much on the pricing side of things. Always remember it's on the technology side. But of course, the back end behind that is always the pricing issues, right? So it's emerging. You can't deny it. It's happening in our space right now.
Just, in rounding up, just another story from Japan, if we can just fire this one up. There's an article that was on Quartz just very recently, and this is about the Line messaging app. So if you have gone to Japan, everybody's online,
Also
right?
in Thailand. Everybody online. They don't use WhatsApp, yeah.
It hasn't really sort of penetrated Singapore, has it? So,
No.
people are on it, but only because they've ever visited those countries, right? So Line's like the big giant of messaging in Japan, $11 billion, this company, and they've just launched their own cryptocurrency. You can't actually use it, though, if you're Japanese, unfortunately, because of regulations. But it just kind of shows that, they're moving at two different speeds here. The fact is that they have this technology and this cryptocurrency, but still the regulations kind of keeping them out of the market. I just find that fascinating because how are you going to get around that? Because you don't just invest in technology like that and just let it lie. You have to push that forward. And if you've got how many 200 million users?
No,
push the
Graham,
agenda.
this is normal in crypto space. Just similarly, last year, you remember in Chinese we call it 9/4, 4th of September. The Chinese government banned cryptocurrency in China. But one of the biggest players in the world today are the Chinese. They will somehow find a way to still trade cryptos.
Exactly.
Likewise, it's going to be happening in Japan about Line.
Yeah.
The ticker symbol is LINK, LINK, right? So those who are in that space will know how to participate in the pricing side of things. On the utility side, no doubt about it, they got the biggest adoption in Japan, like you mentioned, Kineret in Thailand, and in any other countries. But these are the hardcore fans that will find a channel to participate in the pricing side of things. Similarly, just like China.
Yeah, there you go. So we had a roundup of why Asia matters this week. We've done round the houses. We've done China. We've done Thailand. We've done Japan. We haven't missed any out. Of course, we're talking about Singapore as well. A little bit of Taiwan in there. Maybe just in roundup. Neville, I didn't ask you whether you're in or not on cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, you didn't.
No. What's the answer? I think
the answer to me is that it's too much like the .com bubble.
Oh, I see.
And there's a lot of noise about it, and a lot of companies making a lot of money.
Yeah.
Simply in the same way as a .com, when they just put xcompany.com, they just literally overnight added it on. And I think a lot of companies now are simply going, oh, let's do an ICO, and we can get people who give us money, create a coin, and then we'll disappear.
That is obviously one way of looking at it. This is quite a common perception of what's going on, isn't it? Whether or not it's correct. It's kind of like how people are viewing it.
But it's a problem for startups. They hear ICO and you make 10 million, 20 million is like 5 minutes that you can raise, and they want to do ICO, but they don't understand the implication. Then you need to have at least about $300,000, $400,000 for the initial ICO, and then it's a lot of money, and people don't know that, and then they start investing, and then they're stuck. So
Right.
it's a buzzword.
Well, the market was shake out, but I think something is going to be left over. Like even from the
Oh, I
.com
think-
days,
yeah, I
like
think-
there was still the technology and the utility value that's still there, and still many companies came out of that. I mean, obviously Amazon is a good example.
Yeah,
right? So-
companies will come out of it, but if you're putting money in,
Yeah.
you don't know.
well,
there's
people are
no
going to get
measure.
burnt, right?
Yeah,
Like in
you don't
any-
know which
Exactly.
are the genuine companies, and also because there are so many companies out there, I think there's going to be a skill shortage. There's going to, because there's only so many engineers, software engineers, developing the sort of the backbone of it.
What are
And-
these guys charging now? If I was a crypto engineer of the such,
Oh.
what could I be charging in terms of my wages now? Because
A lot
it would
of
like be
money.
back in the day if you were a C++ or a Java developer.
Or even a
mobile
website
app
Mobile app developer. You could be
Yeah.
commanding
Yeah.
handsome wages. What do we know at the moment? You know better than anybody else. Are these guys charging a real premium at the moment?
Yes, they are very high in demand right now, extremely high, and most of the engineers start to upgrade their skill sets
Yeah.
to go into blockchain side of things, cryptography, and of course, they can command a price right now because there's a demand, and rightfully or wrongfully, many of the ICOs that raise money are willing to invest in this kind of people.
And how
in
do you
this
know
kind
if
of
they're any
talent.
good? Because I mean, tomorrow if I said I'm a blockchain engineer,
Yeah.
who
Well,
just-
I
right.
guess that goes for everybody. You don't know if they're
Yeah.
good.
I think today, if you put aside ICO or blockchain, look at in the past history, always happened the same. Just like .com, it was bad, but there are companies that survived the
Yeah.
.com.
Oh yeah,
right?
I think they'll survive. But
Yeah.
what I'm saying is that you as a company, if you decide you've got a really good idea and you want to base it on blockchain, how do you know that the guy or the woman that's just turned up in front of you is any good?
Okay,
Try them out.
we have to
Yeah.
rephrase the question in another way. Let me put it on the table for all of us to review it. Why are companies willing to go into ICOs instead of going to the traditional route of fundraising from the VCs? Why? I gone through both sides of the journey. My parent company, we did 2 rounds of fundraising from traditional VCs. Right now, we are also doing ICO at the moment. But clearly, there are benefits, advantages, and disadvantages.
Well, I'd say one of the best benefits would be it's unregulated.
But
And it
there's
being-
regulation, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah, and so that you can raise money without having to answer.
Let me put it
especially-
across to you, Neville, another way. If you say it's unregulated, you look at the Telegram conversations for most of the ICOs that have completed their projects. The CEOs literally cannot sleep.
Yeah.
The conversations are going on every single minute. So what is regulation then? You are being regulated by your own fans, the supporters that give you money. So how do you weigh that? The price of raising money in ICO versus from a traditional VC.
I mean, if you're a good company, if you're you have a genuine business, but for those that are fly by nights, if I'm an investor, how would I know that this company is genuine and this one isn't?
right.
Simply on a white paper.
Okay, I tend to put on the head of a startup, trying to think of the founder, what is the path for him? How do you answer to many startup owners out there in Singapore today when Carousel burned $30 million in 1 year just to generate $1.3 million in revenue? How do you answer a question like this? I'm a startup founder, I was scratching my head. There's $30 million gone in 1 year. And what is the path left for me, right? VCs are going after the bigger startups. Small startups got a hard time trying to raise money. What other options is left for him? If he continues the path
So
of
you're
raising money
saying
from
ICO?
traditional... No, it's a path of where you can go to survive, to create the longest runway for your own company. It's a question of survivability right now. It's not a question of choice. And that's what I've seen in the space. I'm very deep into both sides of the world, be it fintech or blockchain. And I ask myself these questions every night. Why are we doing this? How are we answerable to our own shareholders, to our customers who pay us money, right? And to the supporters. Right now on our Telegram, we've got 30 over 1,000 fans. Oh my God, it's like non-stop answering of questions. And that's the regulated, so-called regulated space you're moving in. It's a very tough decision, and we have to justify to our shareholders, why do we need to go ICO? Because it's tough to raise money out there. They know it's very tough. And I waited for one VC, very renowned, waited for more than 1 year. And the guy said no. How do you handle a rejection like this? It's very tough.
But I know that a lot of people that raise ICO, and then they want to go back to the traditional raising funds, the investors look at them and say, I don't know if I want to invest in you because you already did an ICO. I don't like that space. So
and there's another
issue.
vice versa example of what you just said, Kineret. Just recently, about 2 weeks ago, you have a SGX public listed company announcing that they are going to do a $50 million ICO. Does that ring a bell? It's crazy right now. Anything could happen. Why would a public listed company need to go and raise money in the ICO space? And that
Why can't they do another share offer?
That was a big headline.
Right.
I think it's a sexy word that everybody likes now. It's a big bubble and it will explode. I'm more traditional in a way. But
I like the balance of opinions. I would play sort of like peacemaker here, because I actually believe that the future's in the middle, right? I think what will happen is that the capital markets will have to bend a little bit to where the ICO market is right now, and in the same way the ICO market will become more regulated to protect maybe more of the consumer investors, sort of the retail investors, right, as opposed to right now it's probably more educated investors who know a bit more about the market. So I think they will meet in the middle somewhere in the future, right? That has to happen, because it's really interesting you're saying like there's a liquidity problem in the market. It's like, why can't a startup go and raise funds? Because there's a gap between them and maybe later stage institutional investors. And at the same time, there's a lack of understanding about what's going on in the ICO market. So therefore a suspicion, because there's a lot of darkness out there. And
it's very shady.
It's very shady.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that will kind of like naturally work its way through, and eventually, hopefully, I think in the medium to long term timeline.
I think in a few years there'll be something new.
Yeah.
It was like the Forex and all of these, and now the ICO, the crypto. In a few years there'll be something new. So the world is changing.
Well,
all the time.
let us know what you think.
What I can definitely say for sure with certainty, what will happen in a few years is that regulation will eventually catch up on cryptocurrency market. That's for sure. And already there are plans by different governments across the world. The first thing that they want to regulate are the cryptocurrency exchanges. They're going after them. They want to open up the KYC. They want to open up the AML, anti-money laundering, and they want to check everything. So it's just going to get better to me from my perspective, because I come from the stock market background. It's just like early days in the penny stocks, where it's highly unregulated. People are just selling stocks like crazy and jamming up the price. This is happening right now, but the laws will catch up.
Right. Fascinating.
So should we wait for the laws to catch up, or should we
That
dive
depends
in?
on which hat you want to put on, Neville. Whether you want to put on an investor hat or you want to put out a founder's hat. It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
If
You have to
wanna pull
decide
the
which
founder's
role you want to
hat,
play.
You need to work hard
Yeah.
and raise funds.
Yeah. Nothing will replace that.
But then again, that being said, you have the traditional VCs who are also setting up a side of their money to do a blockchain fund.
Yeah.
Golden Gates just launched a $10 million Lunex capital. Right? So what does that say? There's so many questions that are unanswered.
Yeah. Well,
And you can never get certainty. It's just everyone's trying to find the best path for their business.
exactly.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. Thank you for the lively debate, everybody. That was fascinating. Really enjoyed that. Got both sides. I mean, I think we have to. I mean, this is why we do this in a round table rather than just sort of present one side. It's good to have a debate about this and get it out and talk about, where we are, not just with the technology, but in Asia in general, and help people from outside of Asia as well understand what's going on inside the region and where we are with all of this advance and so on. So this has been Asia Manners. We were live on YouTube. If you're following on YouTube, then please hit the like button in the face. Subscribe to our channel if you want to catch any future live broadcasts. by us here in the Asia Tech Podcast Studio. We will publish this on LinkedIn as well. If you are tracking this on LinkedIn, then please likewise add your comments or like. And if you're listening to us on the podcast, if you're listening on the audio only version, you can subscribe on iTunes. My name's Graham Brown. Signing off for the evening with my fellow guest, Kineret Karin. Thank you so much. Neville, give us a wave in the corner. And Clemen Chiang, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
We are signing out.